Years passed gently, and the woman's life continued to bloom like the melody of a song that never truly ended. The conservatory had changed so much since the day she first sat at that piano, trembling and uncertain. The walls now echoed not only with perfect notes but with real feeling. Students no longer feared mistakes. They embraced them as part of learning. Everywhere she went, she could see the quiet proof of how much had grown, not just in the students but in herself. Though time moved forward, she still lived simply. Every morning she would make tea, open the windows to let in the sunlight, and then sit at her piano. It had become a ritual, a way of keeping her heart steady. Sometimes she played cheerful tunes that matched the laughter of children outside. Other times her fingers moved slower, weaving soft memories into sound. Her husband had grown older too, but his warmth never faded. He often sat near her as she played, his eyes gentle with pride. "You've changed so many lives," he would say, and she would always answer, "They changed mine first." One afternoon, the director of the conservatory came to visit their small home. He looked both proud and emotional. "We are celebrating our 50th anniversary," he told her. "We want to honor the people who made this place what it is today. You are one of them." She smiled softly, surprised. "I only played the piano," she said. He shook his head. "You did more than play. You reminded us what music really means." They invited her to perform one final time during the celebration, a performance that would close the event. The thought filled her with both happiness and a quiet sense of reflection. She hadn't played for a large audience in years. Now she wondered if her hands could still carry the same emotion they once did. But deep down she knew the music never left her. When the day arrived, the conservatory hall was full again. Many faces were familiar. Students who had once sat beside her piano now stood proudly as teachers, performers, and composers. Some had traveled from far away just to see her play once more. Her husband sat in the front row, his smile calm and full of love. As she stepped onto the stage, a hush fell over the room. The lights were soft, the piano polished and shining under them. She placed her hands gently on the keys. Her heart beat a little faster, just like it always did before she played. But instead of fear, she felt warmth, a kind of peace that only comes when you know you're exactly where you belong. The first note rang out, gentle and deep. It wasn't a grand piece or a technical masterpiece. It was something she had written quietly at home, a song that carried her entire journey inside it. It began with soft tones that spoke of her early days, of doubt, of struggle, of being underestimated. Then slowly the melody grew stronger, full of warmth and gratitude, reflecting the moments when she found her voice and touched the hearts of others. The audience listened in complete silence. Some closed their eyes. Others leaned forward, unable to look away. Her music didn't show off, it told a story. It told of a woman who once thought she was too ordinary to matter, who learned that sincerity could move mountains. Each note was a memory. Each pause held meaning. By the time she reached the final part, her fingers trembled slightly. The melody softened again, becoming almost like a whisper. It was as if she was saying goodbye. Not to the music, but to the stage, to the version of herself who had once needed to prove something. She finished on a long, gentle chord, and when it faded, the hall stayed silent for several seconds. Then the applause came, loud, warm, endless. Tears filled her eyes. She stood and bowed deeply. Around her people stood too, students, teachers, even the director. They clapped not just for the music, but for everything she had given them over the years. After the performance, many came to speak with her. Some were old students now teaching their own classes. "You made me fall in love with music again," one said. "You showed us that it's okay to feel," said another. She hugged them all, her heart full. Her husband came forward and took her hand. "You did it," he whispered. She smiled, her eyes shining softly. "We did it," she said. Later that night, they walked home together just as they had after her very first recital. The city lights reflected on the quiet streets. She felt tired, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that comes after giving your whole heart to something beautiful. "Do you remember," her husband asked, "how nervous you were the first time you played here?" She laughed. "I remember thinking I didn't belong." He smiled. "Now this whole place belongs to you." At home, she placed the small program from the event on the piano. Then she sat down and began to play again, softly for herself this time. The notes filled the room with a familiar comfort. She looked out the window, watching the stars appear one by one. Music, she thought, was like those stars, always there even when hidden by clouds. Days turned into weeks. Life slowed, but she continued to visit the conservatory whenever she could. She spent time with new students, listening to their pieces and giving quiet advice. They looked at her with awe, calling her the soul of the piano. She would laugh softly and say, "I'm just a woman who listens when the piano speaks." One afternoon, as she sat in the practice room, she watched a young girl struggling with a difficult piece. The girl looked frustrated, hitting the same wrong note again and again. The woman walked over gently and said, "Don't fight the keys. They're your friends. Try to talk to them instead." The girl looked confused, then nodded and played again, slower this time. The melody suddenly sounded smoother. The woman smiled. "See? When you listen, the music listens back." The girl grinned, the tension leaving her shoulders. It was in these small moments that she found her true joy, not in applause or recognition, but in seeing others discover the beauty she had once feared she lost. Seasons changed, and though she grew older, her love for music never dimmed. She no longer performed on big stages, but the conservatory always felt like home. Sometimes when she arrived early, she would find students already gathered around the piano playing together, laughing. They would always make space for her. "Play with us," they'd say, and she always did. The melodies they created together were imperfect and beautiful. She often told them, "One day you'll understand that the best songs aren't the ones that impress. They're the ones that heal." One evening, after a long day at the conservatory, she sat quietly by the piano, resting her hands on the keys. The sun was setting, filling the room with golden light. She played one last tune, soft, simple, familiar. It was the same song she had played years ago, the one that had amazed the entire conservatory the first time. But now it felt different. It wasn't a performance, it was a reflection, a gentle thank you. Her husband entered the room, smiling as he heard the music. "Still playing that old song?" he teased. She laughed softly. "It's not old," she said. "It's just grown with me." He nodded, sitting beside her. "It always sounded like home." As the last note faded, she leaned her head gently on his shoulder. The piano stood quietly before them, shining in the soft light. And though the night slowly fell outside, the music never really ended. It lived on in the hearts of everyone she had touched. Her story wasn't just about a woman who amazed a conservatory. It was about a simple wife who reminded the world that true greatness lies not in perfection, but in sincerity. Her melody, woven through years of love, courage, and kindness, would forever echo in that place, in every note, in every heart. In every student who learned to play not just with their hands, but with their soul. And so her song continued, not as a performance, but as a quiet truth that would never fade away. Months passed peacefully after her touching concert. The woman had found her rhythm in life again, balancing her quiet home life with her time at the conservatory. Every morning she would walk through the same narrow street, carrying a small bag of sheet notes and a scarf her husband had given her. The staff greeted her with smiles now, and the students often ran up to share their progress or show her small melodies they had written inspired by her lessons. Though she had become somewhat of a gentle legend in the conservatory, she still carried herself with the same simplicity. She always said she wasn't a teacher, just someone who loved to listen. Many people found comfort in her presence. If a student was nervous before a recital, they would find her sitting near the back of the hall, quietly nodding as if to say, "You can do this." Her calmness had become a part of the place itself. One day, the conservatory director called her into his office. He looked excited, almost proud. "We've been invited to participate in an international cultural exchange," he said. "A team of our teachers and students will perform abroad, and I'd like you to join us." She was stunned. "Me? But I'm not a trained performer," she said softly. The director smiled. "That's exactly why we want you. Your story and your playing have touched people far beyond this building. We want to show that music isn't just about skill, it's about soul." She didn't know what to say. The thought of playing in another country before strangers terrified her. That night she told her husband everything. He listened carefully, then said, "You've spent so long helping others find courage through music. Maybe this time it's your turn." Those words stayed with her. She agreed to go. The following weeks were filled with preparation. She practiced with the selected group, helping them blend their emotions into their music. She was to play a solo piece between the student performances. Though the others encouraged her, she felt nervous. "What if I make a mistake?" she would whisper. The young students always answered the same way. "Then it will just make you more real." When the day of departure arrived, her husband came to see her off at the airport. He placed his hand on her shoulder and said, "Play like you always do, like it's only you and the piano." She nodded, smiling through tears. The journey was long. When they arrived at the foreign conservatory, she was amazed by how large and grand everything looked. The main hall was twice the size of their own, with shining floors and high glass windows. Musicians from several countries were there, each bringing their own style and story. The atmosphere was filled with creativity and respect. The first few days were busy with rehearsals and introductions. The woman listened to many different performances, some technically perfect, others emotionally deep. When it was her turn to play during rehearsal, people from other groups gathered quietly around the door. Her sound was different, simple yet full of feeling. Afterward, a violinist from another team approached her. "You play like you've lived 1,000 lives," he said kindly. She smiled and replied, "Maybe I've just felt deeply." Finally, the night of the international performance arrived. The grand hall shimmered with golden light. Flags from many nations lined the stage. The audience was filled with artists, journalists, and cultural figures. As the program began, one talented group after another performed. The energy in the hall was strong, full of beauty but also of perfection. When her turn came, she felt her heart racing. She looked down at her hands. They trembled slightly, just as they always did before she played. She took a deep breath and reminded herself, play for love, not for applause. Then she sat down. The hall grew still. She began with a quiet melody, slow, tender, filled with memories of home. It was a new piece she had composed herself, inspired by her journey from doubt to confidence. The music spoke of ordinary days, of struggle and hope, of kindness and rediscovery. Each note carried warmth. People listened in silence, drawn into her world. The music built gently, blooming like sunlight after a long winter. When it ended, she didn't look up immediately. She just let the silence rest. Then came the applause, soft at first, then growing louder until it filled the hall. Some stood clapping and smiling. Others simply nodded, deeply moved. She bowed humbly, her eyes glistening with tears. For her, the music had never been about impressing anyone. It was about sharing her heart. After the performance, people came to speak with her. A pianist from another country said, "You reminded me why I started playing. Somewhere along the way, I forgot." Another musician told her, "You made us feel what textbooks never could." She was touched beyond words. That night, she sat alone in her hotel room looking out at the city lights and whispered, "Thank you, music, for finding me again." When she returned home, the conservatory welcomed her like a hero. The students decorated the hallway with small paper stars and a banner that read, "You made us proud." She smiled and thanked them all, though she still didn't think of herself as anything special. In the months that followed, she began helping the conservatory create a special program, one focused not just on performance but on emotional connection. It was named The Heart of Music. She helped design lessons that encouraged students to write their own pieces, explore their feelings, and share their stories through sound. Her approach changed the atmosphere entirely. Students who once feared making mistakes now played freely. The sound of laughter mixed with melodies in the halls. One afternoon, as she watched a group of students perform their original compositions, she felt tears fill her eyes. They weren't perfect performances, but they were honest. And honesty was all she ever wanted music to have. Her husband continued to support her every step of the way. They often spent evenings together near the piano at home. Sometimes he would sit beside her with a cup of tea while she played quietly, creating melodies that belonged to no one else. "This one sounds happy," he would say. "It's because I am," she would reply with a smile. As the conservatory's new program gained attention, visitors came from far and wide to learn from her methods. Journalists wrote about how a simple woman had redefined the meaning of art education. She always said the same thing in interviews. Music isn't about showing off. It's about showing what's inside. But beneath all the praise and recognition, she stayed grounded. She still helped sweep the small practice rooms, still brought home flowers from the market, still laughed at small things. She never let pride take the place of gratitude. One day, while she was walking through the conservatory garden, a small child approached her. He was carrying a toy keyboard, his fingers too small to press the keys properly. "Can you teach me?" he asked shyly. She bent down and smiled. "Of course," she said. "But first tell me, what sound makes you happy?" The child thought for a moment, then pressed one tiny key. It made a soft tone. "That one," he said. She laughed gently. "Then let's start with that." Moments like these reminded her of why she loved what she did. It wasn't about concerts or recognition. It was about touching hearts, one at a time. Years later, people would still talk about her performances, her kindness, and her gift of making music feel human again. But for her, the truest reward was the quiet joy of knowing she had helped others find their own songs. One evening, as the sun dipped low and golden light filled the room, she sat at her piano once more. She played softly, the sound wrapping around her like a memory. Her husband leaned against the doorway smiling. "You never stop," he said. She looked up and smiled. "Because music never does," she replied. And in that moment, surrounded by peace and melody, she realized something simple but beautiful. Her journey had never been about becoming great. It had always been about becoming whole. After the open recital, the woman's life took a quiet but meaningful turn. Though she never asked for fame, her story spread beyond the conservatory walls. Students spoke about her to their families. Musicians mentioned her during gatherings, and soon people from nearby cities began visiting the conservatory to see the woman who played from her heart. It was never her goal to become known, yet her sincerity had a way of reaching people naturally. One day, as she sat near the piano, a young man approached her nervously. He was holding an old violin, its strings worn and bow-frayed. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I've heard about how you play. I don't know much about music theory either, but I want to learn to play from my heart like you." She looked at him and smiled warmly. "Then let's begin right here," she said, motioning to the chair beside her. "Close your eyes. Tell me, what do you feel when you hear this?" She pressed a few gentle notes on the piano. The boy listened, his eyes closed, his face thoughtful. "It feels like rain," he whispered. "Soft but a little sad." She nodded. "Good, now play what that feels like." The sound that came out wasn't perfect, but it was full of emotion. For the first time, the boy wasn't thinking about mistakes. He was simply playing what he felt. She clapped softly when he finished. "See?" she said. "Music listens when you're honest." Moments like this became common. She started spending more time at the conservatory, not as a teacher with a title, but as someone students trusted. They came to her when they felt stuck, scared, or uninspired. She always listened patiently and found gentle words that helped them rediscover their purpose. Her way of teaching wasn't written in books. It was quiet, warm, and deeply human. But while her influence grew, she remained humble. She still helped her husband with daily chores, cooked simple meals, and visited the small market near their home every weekend. She never forgot where she came from. The conservatory might have been filled with talent and ambition, but she carried something different: gratitude. Every time she placed her hands on the piano keys, she remembered how far she had come from those early days when she could only dream of touching one. Her husband often told her, "You've changed the way people see music here." She would laugh softly and shake her head. "I haven't changed anything," she would say. "I just reminded them that music feels before it thinks." As months passed, the conservatory began planning its annual grand performance. It was the most prestigious event of the year, where elite teachers and their best students performed before a large audience, including music critics and cultural figures. When the list of performers was announced, everyone was surprised to see her name among them. The board had invited her as a guest performer, saying her music had inspired many and deserved to be heard on a bigger stage. She was both honored and terrified. She had never played before such a large audience. "What if I forget a note?" she asked her husband one evening, sitting by the window. "What if they think I don't belong there?" He smiled, placing his hand over hers. "You never forget what you feel," he said gently. "And you belong anywhere your heart takes you." His words gave her courage. For the next few weeks, she spent every spare moment at the conservatory, preparing. She didn't choose a famous piece. Instead, she decided to create her own again. A melody that told her story, of fear, of hope, of rediscovering herself through music. The teachers helped arrange the event, and one even offered to accompany her on violin. Though some still doubted her skill, most admired her bravery and sincerity. On the day of the performance, the hall was packed. Soft lights glowed above the stage, and the air was filled with anticipation. The audience included some of the most respected musicians in the region. Her husband sat near the front row, his eyes calm but proud. When her name was called, she took a deep breath and walked toward the piano. Every step felt heavy, yet somehow lightened by purpose. She sat down, her fingers trembling slightly as they touched the keys. The crowd waited silently. For a moment, she closed her eyes. The memories came rushing back, the first time she played in this same hall, the doubt, the challenge, the quiet nights of practice. Then, without overthinking, she began to play. The melody started softly like a whisper. It told a story of a woman who had once forgotten her own dreams, who had watched from the sidelines believing she wasn't good enough. The music grew stronger, expressing how she found courage in unexpected places, how love and persistence gave her strength. Every note spoke with emotion. The room grew quiet, completely lost in her sound. The violin joined in midway, weaving around her piano like a companion on the journey. Together, the instruments created something pure and moving. Some people in the audience closed their eyes. Others simply watched, unable to look away. It was not a perfect technical performance, but it was alive. It breathed. When the final note lingered and faded into silence, she stayed still for a few seconds. The hall was so quiet she could hear her heartbeat. Then came the applause. It started softly, then grew louder and louder until the entire hall stood up. Some even wiped their eyes. Her husband rose to his feet, clapping the hardest. She bowed deeply, overwhelmed by the moment. After the concert, several students rushed to her side. "That was beautiful," one said. "It felt like your music was talking to us." Another added, "I've never seen the teachers so quiet before." She laughed softly, still emotional. "I was just telling my story," she said. "And I think all of us have one." Later, the director of the conservatory approached her. "Your performance reminded us why music matters," he said. "You showed us what it means to feel again." He invited her to hold special workshops for emotional interpretation, a concept that became a new part of the conservatory's teaching approach. But more than recognition, what touched her most was seeing her husband's face. As they walked home that night, he said quietly, "You didn't just amaze the conservatory, you reminded them of something real." She smiled, squeezing his hand. "Maybe I just reminded myself too." Life after the concert felt peaceful. She continued visiting the conservatory, guiding students, playing for herself, and sometimes performing at local charity events. Each performance had its own audience, but her purpose remained the same: to share truth through music. Her story began to inspire people outside the conservatory. Articles were written about her, calling her the pianist of emotion. But she never saw herself as special. "I'm just a woman who found her way back to music," she would say kindly whenever people praised her. As seasons changed, new students came and old ones graduated, but they carried her lessons with them. They learned to play with heart, not fear. Some wrote to her later, thanking her for teaching them not just music but courage. She kept those letters in a small wooden box by her bedside. One afternoon, while she sat alone at the piano, a familiar voice echoed in the doorway. It was the teacher who had once challenged her so harshly. He looked older, his face softer. "You were right," he said quietly. "Music does listen when the heart speaks." She smiled warmly and gestured toward the piano. "Would you like to play with me?" He hesitated, then nodded. Together they played a gentle duet. No rivalry, no pride, just music. As they finished, he turned to her and said, "You've taught us all something I never found in books." She replied, "Music teaches that every day. We just forget to listen." That evening, as the sun set, she stayed a little longer by the piano. She played one last tune, a soft melody that drifted through the quiet room. It was her way of thanking the universe for second chances, for love, for music. She didn't need applause anymore. She didn't need titles or praise. The sound itself was enough. It was her truth, her peace, her home. And somewhere in that peaceful silence, the echo of her song stayed, simple, pure, and timeless, just like the woman who played it. The story of the woman's performance spread quickly through the conservatory. Students whispered about her in the hallways, and some teachers spoke of her with quiet respect. It wasn't just that she played well, it was how she played. There was something honest in her music, something that reminded everyone of why they had fallen in love with music in the first place. She didn't play to impress, she played to feel. The next morning, when she accompanied her husband to the conservatory, she noticed how people looked at her differently. Some smiled kindly, others nodded in greeting. It made her a little nervous, but she stayed humble, carrying herself with the same soft grace she always had. She didn't want attention. All she wanted was time at the piano. After her husband left for work, she quietly entered the same practice room. The light from the tall window fell gently on the piano keys. She ran her fingers across them and smiled. Every time she sat down, it felt like meeting an old friend. She began playing a simple melody, one she had been working on at home. The notes echoed softly, each one carrying a piece of her heart. Not long after, a few students gathered by the door listening. They didn't interrupt. They just stood there, moved by the warmth of her playing. When she finished, one of them clapped softly and asked, "Ma'am, how do you play with so much feeling?" She looked up surprised, then smiled. "I just think about what the song is trying to say," she replied. "Every melody has a story. You just have to listen." Her gentle answer stayed with them. Some of those students began visiting her during their free hours, asking for advice. She never called herself a teacher, but they learned from her. She showed them how to let go of fear, how to stop worrying about being perfect. "Close your eyes," she told one student, "and let your hands speak for you." The boy tried, and though he made mistakes, the sound came out softer, more real. She smiled and said, "That's better, you see. Music listens when you speak with your heart." Soon, more people began noticing her quiet influence. The head of the conservatory passed by one day and saw a group of students gathered around her. He stood at the back listening as she spoke. She wasn't giving lessons in the traditional way. She talked about feelings, about memories, about turning emotions into sound. "If you're sad," she said, "let your piano cry with you. If you're happy, let it laugh." Music isn't about control, it's about connection. Afterward, the head approached her. "You have a gift," he said kindly. "Not just for playing, but for touching hearts. Would you consider helping us teach expression classes?" She froze for a moment. The idea scared her. "I'm not a teacher," she said quietly. "I don't even read music properly." The head smiled. "That's all right. You understand something many people forget. You can help them remember." She thought about it for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "If it can help someone," she said, "I'll try." And so she began assisting in small workshops. At first, some students were unsure. They respected her but doubted how much they could learn from someone who didn't use notes or formal theory. But once she started speaking, their doubts faded. She asked them questions no teacher ever had. "What do you feel when you play?" she would ask. "What memory comes to your mind? What color do you see when you hear this sound?" It was different, strange, but it opened something inside them. One afternoon, while helping a shy student who struggled with stage fear, she shared a small piece of her own story. "When I first played here," she said softly, "I was terrified. I thought people would laugh, but when I stopped thinking about them and listened to the music, everything else disappeared. You don't have to impress anyone. Just tell your truth." The student nodded, tears shining in her eyes, and played beautifully afterward. Meanwhile, not everyone was happy with the attention the woman was getting. One of the teachers who had once challenged her began to feel uneasy. He had spent years building his reputation. Yet now this untrained woman was inspiring students in ways he never could. His pride was wounded. He began speaking coldly about her behind her back, saying she was lucky, that she only played emotionally because she didn't understand real technique. Some teachers agreed quietly, though others defended her, saying that her music touched people in a way theory could not. The tension grew quietly beneath the surface. The woman didn't know about the whispers. She only cared about playing. Every evening after the day's lessons ended, she would stay behind and practice alone. The empty hallways carried her sound through the building. Sometimes her husband would sit in the back row and listen, smiling as she lost herself in the melody. One night, as she was playing softly, the same teacher who resented her walked into the room. She stopped and looked up, surprised. He didn't smile. "You've become quite the favorite here," he said dryly. She didn't know how to respond. "I'm just doing what I love," she said quietly. He folded his arms. "You may fool the students with your feelings, but real music requires discipline. Without knowledge, you're just guessing." His words stung, but she stayed calm. "Maybe," she said softly. "But sometimes guessing from the heart leads you to the right place." He frowned, turning to leave, but then he stopped and said, "Let's see how strong your heart really is. Tomorrow we're having an open rehearsal for the final recital. Play something for everyone. Show them your feeling." She hesitated, unsure. "I don't think I should." "You're their inspiration, aren't you?" he interrupted. "Then prove it." He left before she could reply. Her heart sank. She wasn't afraid to play, but she hated being challenged like that. That night she couldn't sleep. Her husband noticed her worry and asked what was wrong. She told him about the conversation. He listened quietly, then said, "You don't have to prove anything to anyone. But if you decide to play, play for yourself, not for them." His words gave her comfort. She knew he was right. The next day, the conservatory hall was filled with teachers, students, and visitors. It wasn't a grand concert, but it felt serious. When the teacher called her name, a hush fell over the room. She walked slowly to the piano, her hands trembling slightly. Her husband stood near the back, watching her with quiet pride. She sat down, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. For a few seconds, she just listened to the silence. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, but then the melody began to grow. It was not a known composition, it was her own. A piece she had created without writing it down, inspired by her memories, her struggles, her quiet joys. The music rose and fell like the rhythm of her life. Every note carried a piece of her heart. The audience forgot to breathe. Even the teacher who had challenged her stood frozen, unable to look away. When she reached the final note, she kept her hands on the keys for a moment, letting the sound fade naturally. Then she looked up. The hall was completely silent for a few seconds, and then applause erupted. People stood clapping, cheering. Some had tears in their eyes. She smiled shyly, bowing her head. The teacher who had mocked her before approached slowly. His expression had changed. He paused, searching for words. Unexpected, she smiled gently. "It's just how I feel," she said. He nodded slowly, humbled. "I suppose that's what we forget sometimes." After that day, something changed in the conservatory. The students began to mix technique with emotion. The teachers encouraged more creativity. The atmosphere grew warmer, more open. And in the middle of it all, the woman remained the same. Humble, kind, and always grateful. That night, as she and her husband walked home under the soft glow of the streetlights, she said quietly, "I think today, I finally played for myself." Her husband smiled and squeezed her hand, and everyone felt it. She looked up at the stars and whispered, "Maybe music was always meant to find me again." From then on, her visits to the conservatory were not just about playing. She became a quiet symbol of what true music meant: honesty, heart, and courage. People came to her not for lessons, but for understanding. And though she never saw herself as special, everyone who heard her knew she was something rare, a soul who could turn life itself into melody. The next morning, the woman woke early as usual. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, lighting up the small room she shared with her husband. She moved quietly so as not to wake him, but her mind was not on her daily chores. All night she had been thinking about the piano, about the way her fingers had found the right notes even when her heart raced with fear. She had never imagined anyone would listen to her play, let alone teachers from a conservatory. The thought both embarrassed and inspired her. Her husband noticed her silence at breakfast. He asked gently if something was on her mind. She smiled and said it was nothing, though deep down she wanted to tell him everything. How the teachers had teased her, how she had tried to prove herself, and how that short moment had awakened something inside her that she thought was long gone. But she held her words. She didn't want to sound foolish for dreaming again at her age. After her husband left for work, she stood by the window for a long while. Then she walked to the piano in their living room. The keys were dusty, the sound uneven, but it was hers. She wiped the surface clean and sat down. She began playing softly, repeating the same melody she had tried at the conservatory. The music filled the house, and though she stumbled many times, she didn't stop. She wanted to get better, not to impress anyone, but to find her rhythm again. Days passed like this. Each evening when she went to wait for her husband at the conservatory, she would sneak into the same empty room. Sometimes she found the piano already in use, and she would sit outside the door listening to the students practice. She tried to learn from the sounds, how their hands moved faster, how they balanced softness and strength. She didn't have a teacher, but she was learning with her heart. One afternoon, as she played alone, the door opened again. It was the same group of teachers who had teased her before. They watched quietly for a few seconds before walking in. One of them laughed softly and said, "You again? Still practicing?" She smiled nervously. "I just like the piano. It helps me think." "You have courage," said one of them. "Most people wouldn't try again after being put on the spot like that." "Music isn't about pride," she replied gently. "It's something that makes me feel alive." The teachers exchanged looks. Her calm words caught them off guard. One of them crossed his arms and said, half serious, "If you really want to play, you should try something more difficult. Not these simple tunes." She tilted her head slightly. "What would you suggest?" They looked at each other before one of them said, "There's a piece we give to our advanced students. It's complicated, emotional, and takes discipline to play properly. Do you want to try it?" She hesitated. "I don't know if I can." "You can try," he said, walking to the piano and placing a sheet of music on it. The notes looked like a forest of black symbols. She couldn't read them. Her stomach tightened, but she nodded politely. "All right," she said quietly. "Maybe you can play it once so I can hear it." They laughed softly, surprised by her confidence. One of the teachers sat down and played a few lines. The melody was fast, full of emotion, rising and falling like waves. She closed her eyes and listened carefully. She didn't understand the technical side, but she could feel what the music was trying to say. When the teacher finished, she took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys. The teachers stepped back. The first few notes she played were shaky. She made mistakes, but she didn't stop. She remembered how her mother used to say, "Music doesn't punish you for being human." So she played with her heart. Her fingers moved slowly, imitating what she remembered. The teacher stopped smiling. She wasn't following the sheet. But somehow she captured the feeling of the melody, the sadness, the hope, the quiet strength beneath it. By the time she reached the final notes, her heart was pounding. The room was silent. One teacher clapped quietly, almost without thinking. Another nodded slightly. There was no mockery this time, only quiet surprise. "You play differently," one said. "It's not perfect, but it's alive." She smiled softly. "That's the only way I know how." From that day on, she became a familiar face at the conservatory. Some students found it odd to see an ordinary woman sitting in the practice rooms. Others admired her determination. She never took lessons, yet her playing improved. She practiced with patience, often losing track of time. Sometimes her husband would pass by and find her playing after everyone had left. He would stand by the door quietly, smiling. He didn't say much, but he was proud of her. He saw how her eyes lit up when she played, how her posture changed, how she came alive with each note. One evening while she was practicing, the head of the conservatory happened to pass through the hallway. Hearing unfamiliar music, he stopped and peeked into the room. He saw her playing, completely absorbed. Her fingers moved slowly but with feeling. She was not just hitting keys, she was telling a story through sound. After she finished, the head stepped inside. The teachers who had been nearby quickly followed. She looked up, startled. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know anyone was listening." "No need to apologize," the head said kindly. "You play beautifully." She blushed, unsure what to say. "Thank you, but I still have much to learn." The head smiled. "Learning never ends. Tell me, where did you study?" She shook her head. "I didn't, I just listened. My mother used to play and I tried to remember her songs." The head nodded slowly, impressed. "That explains your style. It's natural, not restricted by rules. You play what you feel." One of the teachers spoke up, slightly defensive. "But she doesn't understand technique or reading notes." "Technique can be taught," the head replied. "But heart cannot." The teachers fell silent. The woman lowered her eyes, humbled by the kind words. She didn't want praise, she just loved music. After that encounter, her confidence grew. She practiced even harder. She learned to listen carefully, to correct her mistakes, and to let her emotions guide her. She began helping some younger students who struggled with expression. They were surprised that a simple woman could explain things in a way that made sense. She told them, "Music isn't about being perfect. It's about saying something that words can't." Her presence at the conservatory started to change the mood. Students who once focused only on speed and precision began to pay more attention to feeling. Even the teachers started to notice. The same ones who once mocked her now observed her with quiet respect. But not everyone was pleased. A few teachers felt their authority slipping. They whispered among themselves, calling her lucky, not talented. One of them, particularly proud of his teaching, decided to challenge her publicly. He believed her playing was nothing more than coincidence, a few good moments from someone who didn't know real music. One afternoon, while students and staff were gathered for an informal recital, he called her to the front. She froze, confused. "Me?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he said with a polite but sharp smile. "You've been playing around here for weeks. Let's hear what you can really do." The room grew still. Students whispered among themselves. She looked at her husband in the back. He nodded, encouraging her silently. Her hands felt cold, but she walked to the piano anyway. The teacher placed a new piece of music before her, a difficult classical composition known for testing even skilled performers. The notes were complex, the rhythm demanding. He said, "Play this. Let's see how far your feelings can take you." Her heart pounded, but she didn't argue. She studied the sheet for a few seconds, then asked softly, "Can someone play it once? I just need to hear it." The teacher sighed but agreed. He played a short section showing off his precision. The audience clapped politely. Then she sat down, placed her hands on the keys, and closed her eyes. The first few notes came out slow, uncertain. The teacher folded his arms, expecting her to fail. But as she continued, the room began to change. Her fingers started to flow more smoothly. She didn't copy the teacher's version, she made it her own. The melody softened where it should have been harsh, rose where it should have faded. It was not technically perfect, but it carried emotion so strong that everyone fell silent. When she finished, the last note lingered like a whisper. No one moved. The teacher's smile faded, then a few people began to clap. Slowly, the applause grew louder. Students, teachers, and even the head of the conservatory stood up. Her husband wiped his eyes, proud beyond words. The teacher who had challenged her stood still, speechless. She turned to him and said quietly, "I know I don't play like you do, but sometimes music is not about being right, it's about being real." The crowd applauded again, louder this time. From that moment, everyone in the conservatory looked at her differently. She was no longer the quiet wife waiting for her husband. She was the woman who played from the heart, the one who reminded them what music truly meant. In a quiet town surrounded by soft hills and green trees, lived a woman who never saw herself as special. Her life was simple, her days ordinary yet peaceful. Every morning she would wake before sunrise, make breakfast for her husband, and hum softly as she moved around the small kitchen. She didn't have many dreams left to chase, but one thing always stayed close to her heart: the sound of the piano. There was an old upright piano in her living room, a little out of tune, its wood faded from years of use. It had belonged to her mother, who once believed music could bring peace to the soul. As a child, she used to sit beside that piano, watching her mother's fingers glide across the keys like magic. But when life got harder, the piano went silent, and so did her dreams. Years passed, and the woman became busy with life, love, and responsibility. She never complained. She thought some dreams are meant to stay inside the heart, quietly resting there. Her husband worked as a maintenance worker at the local music conservatory. He was a kind man, hardworking and calm. Sometimes, when his shift ended late, she would walk to the conservatory to wait for him. She loved walking through the corridors filled with music, young students practicing violins, pianos, or singing softly. Each sound carried energy, and though she didn't belong there, she always felt drawn to it. One evening, while waiting, she found herself alone in a small practice room. A grand piano stood there, its black surface shining under the light. She hesitated, looking around to make sure no one was watching. Then quietly she sat down. Her hands hovered over the keys for a moment, trembling slightly. She pressed one key, just one, and smiled at the familiar sound. It was richer than her old piano, deeper, like the voice of something alive. She began to play a simple tune, something she remembered from childhood. Her fingers moved slowly, uncertain but gentle. She didn't know that someone had been listening. Down the hall, two teachers had stopped walking when they heard the faint melody. One of them whispered, half amused, "Who's playing in there?" They peeked inside and saw her, a simple woman in a plain dress, sitting quietly and lost in the moment. They exchanged looks, smiling slightly. To them, she was just someone trying to play for fun. They stepped into the room. "Excuse me," one of them said politely but with a tone that carried superiority. "Are you a new student?" She looked up, startled. "Oh, no, I'm not. I'm just waiting for my husband. He works here." The teachers nodded but stayed. "You play the piano?" one asked. She smiled shyly. "A little. Not really. Just for myself." "That was an interesting choice of notes," the other teacher said, glancing at the piano keys. "What were you trying to play?" "Just something I remember from long ago," she said softly. "It helps me relax." The teachers exchanged a grin, not unkind but a little condescending. One of them walked closer and said, "This piano has heard only serious pieces, you know. Maybe you can try something a bit more challenging?" She looked confused. "Challenging?" "Yes," the teacher said, his tone playful yet testing. "Let's see how well you can handle something classical." "How about the Moonlight Sonata?" She froze. The name sounded familiar, but it was a difficult piece, something far beyond her ability. She gave a small, nervous laugh. "Oh, I'm not good enough for that. I just play by ear." "Then try it," the other said, folding her arms. "Play what you think it sounds like." Their smiles didn't seem cruel, but there was a certain edge, as if they were amused to see what she would do. She hesitated. She didn't like being the center of attention, but part of her wanted to try. She took a breath, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play. At first it was rough. The rhythm was uneven, the notes stumbled. One teacher smirked slightly, but then something changed. She closed her eyes, let go of fear, and followed what she felt inside. Her fingers found a flow, imperfect yet heartfelt. The melody came alive, not precise but filled with emotion, a quiet sadness, a hidden strength. The sound filled the room softly, like a voice telling a story without words. The teachers stopped whispering. They stood still, listening. The woman had no technique, no formal training, but she played as if she was speaking through the piano. When she reached the end, the last note lingered in the air. She opened her eyes, breathing slowly. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then one teacher clapped gently. "Not bad," he said. "You play with feeling." She smiled faintly, unsure if it was a compliment or pity. "Thank you," she said softly. The other teacher looked at her thoughtfully. "You should practice more," she said. "It's rare to see someone play by ear like that." The woman nodded. "I used to play when I was young," she admitted. "Then life got busy. But the sound, it never left me." They didn't know what to say to that. She wasn't someone chasing success or recognition. She simply loved the piano because it made her feel alive. Her husband appeared at the doorway, surprised to see her surrounded by teachers. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said with a smile. "I was just playing a little." One of the teachers chuckled. "Your wife has talent. Maybe she should join our beginners class." Her husband smiled proudly. "She doesn't need classes to enjoy music." They all laughed politely, and the moment passed. But as they left, the teachers kept talking about her. One said, "It's strange, she plays without training but somehow makes it sound real." The other nodded. Yes, there was something raw about it. Not perfect, but honest. That night, back home, she sat at her old piano again. The keys were uneven, but the sound felt familiar and comforting. She played softly, thinking about the way the teachers looked at her, half amused, half curious. She wondered if they really saw what she felt or if they just saw a woman out of place. Her husband came to stand beside her. "You played beautifully today," he said. "I could hear you from the hallway." She laughed quietly. "I made mistakes." "Maybe," he said. "But everyone makes mistakes. Not everyone plays with heart." She looked at him and smiled, grateful for his kindness. Deep down, something inside her stirred, a small flame of confidence she hadn't felt in years. Maybe she could still learn, still grow. Not for anyone else, but for herself. The next week, when she came to the conservatory again, she passed by that same room. She stood by the door for a moment, listening to students practicing. Their notes were sharp, mechanical, full of discipline. Yet she felt that something was missing. Music, she thought, should never sound forced. She quietly stepped inside when the room was empty. This time she played without hesitation. Her fingers remembered the feeling, the rhythm. She tried to blend what she had learned from listening to the students with what her heart wanted to say. The result wasn't perfect, but it was hers. The music filled the empty space, gentle but strong. She didn't notice that someone had stopped outside the room again. It was the same teacher from before. He stood there, listening, no longer amused but thoughtful. When she finished, he walked in. "You came back," he said. "Yes," she replied simply. "I wanted to try again." He nodded slowly. "You really love playing, don't you?" She smiled. "It's the only time I forget everything else." He looked at her differently this time, with a quiet respect. "Keep playing," he said. "Sometimes feeling is more important than perfection." As she walked home that day, the sun setting behind the conservatory, she felt lighter. Maybe the teachers didn't mean to be cruel. Maybe they were just used to measuring talent in grades and certificates. But life had taught her differently, that music wasn't about showing skill, but about showing soul. That evening, as she prepared dinner, she hummed the tune she played earlier. The melody drifted through the house like a quiet promise. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years she felt that something beautiful was beginning again.